Okay. Thanks, everyone. Obviously, the point of this event is to generate conversation, but I'm going to have to call it to an end. My name's David Brophy. I work here in history. I'm an academic. I'm a member of the NTEU, and I'm also a member of Sydney University Staff for Palestine. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session of today's event. I want to acknowledge, as always, that we're meeting on stolen Gadigal land and pay respect to elders past and present. And I just want to extend my personal thanks to you all for being here today and making this event such a success. I've heard things today that can only be described as devastating, but it has also been a big morale boost as well. And just the simple fact of being able to pull this event off, not without some difficulty along the way, can be considered a small victory. So thank you all for helping us with that. So we've been surveying the scene. We've been engaging some of the key debates that arise in this sphere. And the purpose of this session is to focus the discussion a little bit more on a question that has naturally arisen prior to this point, but what is to be done? What is working? What is not working? Where can we effectively direct our energy, including the energy that we have here today in this room? What are the strategies? What are the countermeasures? What are the actions that we need to strengthen our collective defense, but also to advance our basic objectives, such as, from a university point of view, the institutional boycott of Israeli universities? So that's an invitation, I think, to us all to think hard and be creative. But to help us with this, we have four speakers today that I'll just run through the introductions. First up, we're going to hear from Vince Caughley, who is the New South Wales Division Secretary of my union, the union of many people in the room, the union that if you're eligible to join but haven't yet joined, you should join. That's the National Tertiary Education Union, which of course is an organisation that confronts these issues on many different levels, from the defence of individual members all the way through to the national policy level. So we're very happy to have Vince here today. Then we're going to hear from Grace Street, who is a student activist and the current president of the SRC here at the University of Sydney. Also an organisation that's very much on the front lines of this fight. Following Grace, we're going to invite Michael Bradley to address us, possibly a name that needs little introduction in a room like this. Michael Bradley is the managing partner of Marque Lawyers, which I'm sure has a huge portfolio of work by now, defending people who have found themselves in the crosshairs of the sorts of attacks that we've been talking about. Particular mention, I think, has been made and should again be made of Michael's firm's defence of our colleagues Nick Reamer and John Keane here at the University of Sydney, but potentially other victims with us in the room today. And you may have also seen Michael's commentary in Crikey. He's quite an active voice in the public debate as well. And then last, we will hear from Anne Khoury. Anne is an academic in the School of Geosciences. She's also the executive officer of that school. She is, no exaggeration, someone who's been absolutely instrumental in getting this event off the ground. So thank you very much for your tireless work with that, Anne. Anne has a couple of books, including Globalization, Development and Social Justice, 2015, and an edited volume on climate fiction, which is called Our Entangled Future, 2019. So introductions out of the way. I'll start by inviting Vince to speak to us. Thank you, Vince. Really? Okay.
Thanks, David. G'day, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on stolen Gadigal land, and I want to pay my respects to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people here today. No surprises. I'm going to approach this through a trade union lens. That is the discussion of strategies of resistance. And so very much what can the NTEU as a workers' organisation inside universities and as part of the broader trade union movement, what we can do to turn opposition into organised power in talking about what needs to be done. So I think two things have to inform our strategy at all times. And one is understanding the context. It is just absolutely so crucial to understand the context that we're organising in. And that can be a challenge because things change, as we know. And then recognising that opposition in itself doesn't build power. So anger, political clarity, refusal matter, but they have to be organised into collective force. So this view has when I think about coming here this afternoon and drawing on what is now maybe 30 years of protest, so street protests, marches, occupations, blockades, small actions in my local neighbourhood, and then of course a whole bunch of strikes in different workplaces. Over that time, quite clearly, I have observed a real shift in policing tactics and in the broader management of protest overall. So dissent is now much more managed through policing, law, procedure, and risk. And there's been, as we know, a real coordinated tightening of the democratic space, particularly in the street, and then on campus, obviously, and in our public institutions. And I've also, thinking about it, just observed this in the discussion. I've always drawn the short straw with police liaison over the years, right? So just in negotiating, the terms of protest, the attitude has shifted in recent years. And it was only a couple of weeks ago around a union rally outside the US consulate. I've got a bunch of data points. You can also see, next slide, please, Rich. You can also see just over time the shift in the police force themselves. So top left, we used to face them in their slacks. They're sort of more, civilian type outfits. In this case, they've got their jackets on, lest their, blue shirts get ripped or whatever. But you can see bottom left, I think certainly after 9/11, but just in the, the noughties, it suddenly, the outfits became sort of more militarized, as did their tactics. And I think most sort of clearly in recent times, you can see the top right there where, this is a really clear shift. So I, like I'm sure a few of you, was assaulted and pepper sprayed, but being chased through the streets like that in a very coordinated, organised police operation was something new. So I think quite clearly, obviously, the context is this is a new phase in anti-protest behaviour, more aggressive, punitive, more willing to treat Palestine and Palestine solidarity as a public order problem. And inside universities, that same logic is expressed through institutional administrative power. And as a union official in the NTEU, I see it every day in the governance of our institutions, through enterprise bargaining, through workloads, through the control of space, through university policy, and the effort to turn collective problems, and this is a quite clear tactical manoeuvre, to turn collective problems into individual cases on the part of management. So when we talk about Palestine solidarity, free speech and protest rights on campus, we're talking about who controls the space, who can organise, who carries the risk when dissent becomes visible. Next slide, please, Nick. Yeah, so Palestine solidarity is the immediate site of this repression at our, what I would call, corporatised university system. It's where the university's stated commitments, ostensibly, to free speech, academic freedom, public debate are being tested most sharply. And so the task of the NTEU, the task of trade unions in this context, is to turn anger, political clarity and that refusal into a collective force that can defend people, make repression costly. That's the key, and sustain the pressure. Next slide, please. So the crackdown that we are seeing is a method of governance. And then the crackdown of Palestine solidarity has made visible the real character of power inside the corporate university. So management governs through policy, disciplining staff and students, reputation, risk and control of space. And it turns political conflict into conduct management. We experienced this very sharply in the union. Protest becomes a safety issue on campus. And collective action, they always try to turn it into individual exposure. How can we pick people off? What processes? Treat everything as an individual matter and isolate individuals. And that's why, the campus access policy here at Sydney Uni, postering, meeting spaces, visible protests matter. They're the practical ground on which political communication either happens or it's suppressed. And that's the challenge for us. Next slide. So I think for staff and students, free speech, if we want to have free speech, such as it is, it's exercised through collective practice, right? So an individualised account of free speech, if you are conceiving of free speech as an individual right, it's too thin for what we're facing. The question is whether people can act together in public with protection and organisation. It's that clear. It's that stark. Rights, and I think it's so important to realise that rights only become real. We've got fantastic enterprise agreements, but they're only real when there's power behind them. Rights need conditions. So, and it's all about collective defence, and in the union, shared risk. That's the idea of collectivity, visible resistance, and protection, that protection from being picked off one at a time. So their method is isolation. Our method is collective defence. Next slide. And this is the question linking Palestine solidarity, academic freedom, enterprise bargaining, in fact, and governance reform, because it's all about, it goes to that central question, who has power in the university? Academic freedom is sometimes treated as a professional entitlement or, policy clause or a value statement. But in practice, and the NTEU is very clear and strident on this, it's an industrial and it's a political right, because it means that staff can safely teach, research, criticise, organise, support students, speak publicly, including about Palestine, about racism, war, colonialism, state violence, corporate power, and university governance. And this, for us, is what academic freedom means. But academic freedom depends on secure work. It depends on fair disciplinary processes. It depends on enforceable rights. Behind that, strong union organisation and other things like manageable workloads. And collective defence. And this, again, is the NTEU's approach. And that's why enterprise bargaining is part of this fight. So we are in enterprise bargaining at this university right now, and academic freedom is central to our negotiations, because it's where we can test the conditions that will actually allow academic freedom to be exercised. So in our universities, the same executive power that controls budgets, workloads, restructures, bargaining, also controls the space, the policy, discipline, reputation, the boundaries of so-called acceptable political expression. And so I think that's why union activity can't be counterposed to, we can't counterpose our industrial work and the social justice work, because bargaining, academic freedom, protest rights, governance reform of the entire university sector, and Palestine solidarity all contest the same concentration of corporate and managerial power. Next slide, please, Nick. So the 4 strategic tasks, I think, is turn isolation into collective defence. We have the numbers. We need to organise purely, almost, in the first instance, as a defensive mechanism, because fear and uncertainty are demobilising. Second, we have to make the repression costly. So I think managements only act when repression can be kept isolated and managed, right? So if the threats stay private, if the bans are administrative, the sanctions are individual, anti-protest laws technical, they can absorb the cost. Our task is to have them pay a price for this. In the wake of the Herzog protests, the NTEU took a motion to Unions New South Wales to defend democratic protest and call for the repeal of the anti-protest laws. Happy to say it was endorsed unanimously, and by that I mean even by the Police Association, who that was something. I mean, they made clear they really don't like me in the NTEU, but then vote for it, because you say, hey, are you for democracy or not for democracy? When you put it that starkly, well, they've got to keep up appearances, I guess. So, but that shifts the issue from an isolated Palestine protest to a broader Labor movement position on democratic rights that then, as we know, is now going into the state Labor conference. You've got to treat policy as contested instrument of power. The policies are not benign. The policies are how the managements and the corporate university controls us. We must contest. And then we've got to move, I think the key is from condemnation to practical solidarity, because condemnation and mobilisation matter. They really, really do. They name the crime, they make dissent visible, build confidence, show people that we're prepared to move. But they're only the beginning, because the strategic question is what pressure points they open up, how we use them, what material steps make solidarity meaningful. And we've got to win things. And then for the NTEU, this is a really live question. So I'm not saying we've got all the answers, because we have a formal position in support of the institutional academic boycott of Israel. We strongly oppose Universities Australia definition of anti-Semitism. I mean, if it was an undergrad assignment, they'd fail, right? Like, look, just no question. It so obviously blurs the line between anti-Semitism and political criticism of Israel and Zionism. It's absurd, right? We're not going along with this. But the practical challenge is, we got these positions, is how to turn this into organised pressure, right? What are the clear targets? What are our clear demands? How do we make this real? What is our collective action plan, and a plan that can give them real force? So that is the challenge. That's the open challenge. We will work with people, but we got to make this. We've got to make this real, and our strategy must be really clear. Now, I began, just to close, with the proposition that opposition by itself doesn't build power, and I stand by that. Unfortunately, strategy means understanding the context and then organising in it. The repression of Palestine solidarities exposed the real struggle over the political character of our universities. We have had a corporate takeover of our universities. And so it's a question of who controls the space, who gets to speak, and how work is governed and where power sits. Now, anger, political clarity and refusal matter, but we got to get power. They only mean things when we have power behind it. And this is the historic role and challenge for trade unions. In the NTEU, we bring that collective organisation, industrial strength, legitimacy of workers acting together to defend the conditions. But our challenge now is to actually defend the very notion of collectivity, the very idea that there is a public good. It has become that naked. Democratic space isn't granted. We know that, right? It has to be won, and it's won through collective action. It's defended through organisation. Organisation is so clear, key, and it's expanded by people who keep acting together. We are on the right side of history, friends and comrades, but history doesn't move just by being right, alas, right? It moves when people organise in numbers, when we build real power. That's our challenge, and turn solidarity into material force. That is how we defend the space to speak and act. And it is how we keep building that collective power that is required for a free Palestine. We can do it. Thank you.
I can be a bit softly spoken, so let me know if I need okay, just remind me if I'm not. Firstly, very glad to be here as a student today, but of course I'm not purporting to speak for all students. We have quite a broad and diverse student movement for Palestine, but I can at least speak to my experience in different roles in the SRC over the last 2.5, 3 years. And generally what we're doing at the moment, as has been identified, the SRC is one of the groups or unions fighting off repression at the moment, particularly in what the university at least is calling a post-Bondi context, which is legitimizing a lot of this repression. Nothing has changed for us in terms of our goals and the demand of liberation for Palestine, but for them it's given a lot more license and room to come down on us. And I think the SRC has always been a bit of an enemy of the university. Michael was talking earlier about in the 1940s already having symposiums about communism and sex. So you can imagine there's always been a bit of an adversarial relationship there. But also in the student context, I think it's good to note that things are quite different, particularly compared to the 1940s or even a few decades ago. We're in a post-voluntary student unionism context and also in a post-COVID context where students are increasingly more isolated. There's just more students around on campus, but groups like the SRC aren't getting more resources to bring them together. And with the current housing cost of living crises, a lot of students are just more worried about their immediate standards of living and material concerns than being able to get into things like organising. And then it's just the climate at the moment. A lot of international students have a perception that they're not even allowed to protest on campus, and the university doesn't make any effort to clear that up either, which I think is a really important point. So we're in a bit of it's a sticky situation, but I think we're doing well given that everything that we're up against. Currently, this session is supposed to be about strategies of resistance, so I won't get too much into the repression, but at the moment there's a huge amount of complaints, a GIPA and FOI that we're giving information for, new policies like the campus access policy or things like the civility rule, veiled threats from the uni about misconduct or funding, a lot of surveillance, particularly online, cyberbullying on a more individual scale. But at least we'll be channeling all of these hopefully into submission to the Royal Commission showing how the definitions that they use of anti-Semitism lead to these consequences that harm students, that harm anyone's ability to even say what they believe in on campus. So it's a bit hard to be optimistic and proactively resisting right now. Currently, we're very much on the back foot, just fending off active complaints from the uni and externally now that the tide has turned to universities. As we've identified, the attacks are very hyper-individual and they're slapped with confidentiality clauses, which also then invites discord about how to approach them and whether you're capitulating to the university or not. But that is the university's goal, to be divisive and silencing. In terms of strategies and experiences, which can hopefully provide some ideas and also insight into the current state of the attack on and resistance within higher education, particularly on the student side, I plan to broadly cover a few things today, which is firstly the direct protest actions that we've taken, like the Gaza Solidarity encampment and our unauthorised stalls day in August 2024. The maintained campaigning events and protests on Palestine for students through various groups and forums like Students for Palestine, Students Against War, the SRC's Autonomous Collective Against Racism, and a lot more. Going hard on certain cases which we've won, and I think is really important to point out that we have won these ones, including protecting Luna in a 2025 complaint, and the most recent one about the Students Against War's poster using the Handler symbol, which got so many groups and individuals on board and did make the university backpedal due to the public pressure and a unified response, which is such great things to draw lessons from. Importantly, I can talk to the student general meetings that we've had over the last few years and our national student referendum on Palestine, joint efforts with the National Union of Students, other universities, allying with the NTEU and more, highlighting the university's ties to weapons, implicit Israeli universities and companies, pushing the University of Sydney Union to be BDS compliant like the SRC is, and now a bit more on the bureaucratic side and trying to fight fire with fire. Submissions to the lobby groups and universities' own biased inquiries and Royal Commission. We're planning our own complaint at the moment against the ones that have been lodged against us, and trying to fight, as we've been discussing today, that one-sided appeal to safety that only applies to certain people and their levels of comfort. I'd like to start with the Gaza Solidarity Encampment, which was huge, and I guess that's part of the image and promotional materials for today, and I'm sure you're all aware of it. And I think it came from a time when we saw a need to escalate and stand solidarity with the students at Columbia University. And it was hugely successful. We were the first student encampment in the Southern Hemisphere, and a lot of others kicked off after us. We set up outside the iconic university quadrangle on the lawns there and immediately garnered a lot of attention, both positive and negative. And there were a lot of different groups there across the left, also the Muslim Students Association, but overall everyone came together to build a really robust encampment that lasted in the end about 2 months. And the staff and broader community were also really key to the encampment. We thrived off the support while the rest of the society and the mainstream tried to vilify us. And we had this educational community aspect to the encampment, which I think was so important and challenged the corporatization of the university and higher education that we discussed earlier as a driver for this repression. So there was the teach-ins, which a lot of staff here actually conducted, pretty much like a little encampment school. We had music nights, a Shabbat dinner, a day for kids with face painting, which the Daily Telegraph did not like, but that was really fun at the time. And the frequent rallies we had throughout the encampment as well meant that we were able to challenge the mainstreams or the university's idea that we were just there to cause trouble or had no plan, but we actually reminded people that we were there for the people of Gaza, highlighting the university's complicity and ties and bringing more people into the fight as well. And it did take a lot of things like having camp guidelines stating that how to keep each other safe and not call the police if things came up, which they did because we did get a lot of attacks. We had rosters of people to keep watch overnight and then also eventually media liaisons to keep our communications tight and correct. I'd also just like to shout out that the NTEU branch voted to protect the camp if needed, which was a great show of solidarity. And there was that day where a Zionist rally was being held and people from all kind of parts of society and groups came just in the middle of a work day on a random Friday to protect the encampment. And there's these great photos of people forming an actual human chain around the encampment as people were just allowed by the University Protective Services to come up and harass and yell at us. Of course, not much, unfortunately, came from the encampment itself. There was a divestment working group that the SRC and most people from the encampment were left completely out of, and its terms of reference in the first place were never going to bring anything that would feasibly help the people of Gaza. So even though there weren't material wins, though, there was such a huge wave of momentum. We'd done so much research and we'd shown the university's true colours in response to the encampment. And then, of course, the university was embarrassed. They were threatened and under pressure from lobbyists, which then led to the campus access policy of 2024. And we had then again great, unified, strong resistance to that, which I think is something we can try to emulate again, hopefully, when these attacks come up. We had an open letter with so much of civil society supporting type media releases and the coverage. And a highlight was the Unauthorised Stalls Day, where we had support from across the Greens, the Council of Civil Liberties, unions like RAFWU, some student societies like the Taylor Swift Society and the Tabletop and Board Game Society, everyone coming together because we identified it wasn't just about Palestine, but it was a threat to everyone's civil liberties if you just wanted to set up a stall on campus at all. And showing that it was a nonsensical and punishing policy in that way. And that was shortly followed up by our first student general meeting on Palestine, which was a formal mechanism through the SRC, which requires 200 students to write to say that they want to have the general meeting. And that one was about cutting ties with weapons companies in Israel against the campus access policy and also affirming support for a single democratic and secular state for historic Palestine. And we had at least 500 undergraduate students show up in person on a random Wednesday night for that, which was amazing. And at the time, it was a huge, optimistic and mobilizing event, but it's also been really, really helpful in the current context where we're fighting off continuous complaints of why is the SRC supporting Palestine? How do you know this is what students want? Why, to quote, do you have anti-Zionism as an institutional stance? And it's things like the student general meetings, of which we had two in the National Student Referendum, where we can actually combat the university trying to claim that students or staff or anyone doesn't care about Palestine and that we're putting our own politics above what students want and their rights more generally. And I was part of the discussion earlier about, Zionists have their surveys about how students feel or the numbers of students that feel unsafe on campus. And having some of our own data in that way has been extremely helpful, even though the university tried to say, well, that was less than 1% of the student population. I'd like to see them try to get 500 students in a room to vote on something, which I don't think would ever happen. So now we're looking at different avenues as well. It's included things like the People's Inquiry, which we've heard about today, the inquiry into anti-Semitism and fighting tooth and nail in there to not capitulate to being told that you're guilty of anti-Semitism in there, a submission to the inquiry into hate speech and slogans inquiry in January, and again, a Royal Commission submission in the works. And this will be focusing really on people's personal experience and that double standard of safety, as mentioned earlier, and really the impact that all of this is having on students at the moment, which also extends to staff. But I guess what we're focusing on is pretty stark. There was mention earlier of the infamous bake sale that was shut down, and then the university executive later saying that it was because it could have had food with allergens. Again, the instance of the Luna case where writing slogans on a whiteboard could have led to suspension, and which that case could have meant deportation and being unsafe for a trans asylum seeker. A Palestinian student being told they need to substantiate their claims about people being killed in Gaza, even though a key part of genocide is the targeting and killing of journalists, which is just so uninformed and racist to be putting that burden on Gazan students themselves. And then bring it up in other forums as well, like recently the New South Wales Parliament inquiry into university governance, looking at how the Senate pushed through the campus access policy without telling anyone, their bogus feedback process for the 5 key policies, in which we did have jointly organised feedback from the SRC, Supra and the NTEU, but they either didn't take it on board or they twisted some of what we had suggested. And working from the bottom up as well, from a grassroots level, like at the moment, the USU and university won't get on board with BDS. So we're looking at getting more individuals and clubs and societies to do it, because they're not going to listen to us. They might at least listen to some of the stakeholders and people that they see as like the real students under them, to show that cutting ties and reducing complicity is feasible and that they do have an interest in doing so. It's same with the exchange ties. One of the 4 with Bezalel University has already been cut, which is a great development. And again, back to the bureaucratic stuff is kind of where we're at the moment. And this is also where I just like to say we do need help on this front, because they're really laser focusing at the SRC at the moment, particularly through the complaints process. So now that we've fended off a bunch in a row, and thoroughly defending our advocacy, not making concessions or bowing down to the pressure to falsely admit that we did something wrong, which is what they want, we'll be compiling all of those now just to show how draconian and vexatious these complaints are, and how the university itself legitimizes these complaints because they deem them to be valid and pass them on, even if they claim, as they have been, that a complaint doesn't equal misconduct or being guilty. But that's exactly what they're doing in the letters. And like myself, I did expect repression this year. I have experience over the last few years, and I have really fantastic support from our SRC staff, some of which are here today, and student reps. But it's still like, it gets to your core, and it instills fear, and it makes you question if you have done something wrong, or at the very least creates extra work and distraction from fighting for our own Palestinian rights. So this is where we need support as well. We're resisting at the moment, but it's on the reactive side, and we really need to get to the core of this, where it's looking at things like the National Student Ombudsman to talk about the complaints processes, the confidentiality clauses, and the impact on students. Even in the Student Affairs Unit, they've noted that they had a 117% increase in gender-based violence-related complaints in the last year with the new legislation. And you can imagine that they're not able to actually respond to those because they're too busy dealing with vexatious ones about being pro-Palestine. And so students and staff overall are suffering under what the university is currently doing. And staff, of course, had their jobs on the line, but then there's also risk levels for students to take into account, like their visas being linked to their enrollment status and things. So teaming up, as we have in the past, particularly in 2024, is so vital to protect each other. I can't get fired, but we could get defunded, and they've threatened that a few times. So I really love to continue that discussion after this. And again, also, I'm not claiming to speak on behalf of all students, and there's a lot here today. So if you want to offer other things as well and those strategies of resistance, I really welcome that. But again, thank you for the opportunity. I hope that was helpful in some respects in terms of things like the referenda and getting some of that data and fighting fire with fire. And I'd love to continue talking further after this. Thank you.
Hi. I was really grateful to be asked to join you this afternoon and to be here. I've skipped the second last day of a case in Melbourne that's been running for 3 weeks, of the case of Jason Gillam against the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. And you don't know the story. Jason's a concert pianist. He was contracted to play 2 concerts with the MSO in August 2024. And at the first concert, he played a new piece of music called Witness by an Australian composer, which is dedicated to the journalists killed in Gaza, which at that time were around 100. And Jason introduced the piece, explained the dedication, and made a short statement about his opinion that targeting journalists is a war crime. And his second concert was cancelled by the MSO immediately, and now we're in the federal court arguing about that. That's just one microcosm of what's been going on. Since October 7, I've represented more than 60 individual people who have found themselves targeted by the pro-Israel lobby for farcical allegations of anti-Semitism in all sorts of walks of life. And with the benefit of that experience, I can tell you that the only sector that is worse, institutionally worse than the arts sector, is the university sector. So you can take that as a fact. And I've worked with a lot of academics and students in quite a number of institutions, university institutions around the country. And I can also tell you that the worst, in the sense of being the most pathetic of the universities, is this one, which I say with no pleasure and a lot of sadness as someone who got my degrees here as well. But that's the truth. Sydney University has covered itself in disgrace in the way that it has responded to the pressure that it's been placed under persistently over the past 2.5 years, and what it's done to both its own staff and student bodies and its own standing as an institution of academic integrity. Anyway, that's the context. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of the session title, Strategies of Resistance, is what do you do when you are the one in the crosshairs? If you are a member of staff or a student at a university and you're the subject of a complaint. And while I endorse absolutely everything that Vince and Grace has said about the power and the critical importance of collective action in self-defense and in sort of rebalancing power, that's only so helpful when you're the one whose name is on the complaint and you're the one who's being required to respond to your institution to allegations of misconduct. Because, all of us would like to think that we would be the guy standing in front of the tanks, stopping them from entering Tiananmen Square. But it's also true that he probably never made it home with his shopping bags. So it's a big ask. And everyone, every staff member needs their job and presumably would like to continue to pursue their academic career. Every student would like to get their degree and keep their visa and stay in the country. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. That's all right. So, this means that each person has to make very difficult individual choices about what are they going to do when this is the situation they find themselves in. The thing, I always think about these problems from both a strategic and a tactical perspective. And the strategic question is, know your enemy. Where are they coming from? What is happening for them? Difficult as it may be to want to feel empathy towards university administrators, I try. Interestingly, what we've observed over the past couple of years is a shift in the way that the universities are operating in this sphere. So certainly in the early phases, what they were doing was responding to campaigns. So the pro-Israel lobby is very organised and it chooses its targets and then it goes hard. And so universities were being bombarded by letter writing, emailing campaigns, often in coordination with reports in the Murdoch press or questions in Parliament. Famously, Randa Abdel Fattah, who's a client of mine, lost her ARC Future Fellowship grant for 10 months entirely because of a single article in The Australian. And so, but what's been happening as time has gone on more and more is that the universities are not needing that. They're actually preempting. I've had certainly several cases recently where there's been no complaints at all. The universities are taking preemptive action because they're anticipating that and they're actually doing the work for the lobby. Now, that's very sad and quite troubling, but it's also that's a practical reality. I would call it late-stage McCarthyism, where the authorities don't actually even need to do the work anymore because the populace are so terrorised that they become terrorisers. And the good news is it's late stage because the insanity of it eventually eats itself, but still we're in that phase. But what that tells us is that what the universities are responding to is the perception of threat to itself. Universities, like all institutions, care about nothing more than their own continued existence. So they respond to threat, what they see as existential threat. And in this current environment, the really existential threat they see is the threat of being seagulled. They're worried about the scorecard. They're worried about getting a low mark. They're worried about being labelled an anti-Semitic institution. So they're doing everything they can to avoid that. To take up a point that Vince made, it's really important to then tactically make it expensive. Because if the university, feeling that threat, is preemptively taking action against people it supposedly owes a duty of care to, calling out their protest behaviour, their activism, their writing, their social media posting, their speeches in lecture theatres, whatever it is, their cake stalls, whatever it is, and saying, hey, we're a little concerned. That may be anti-Semitic. And the university as an institution feels we're not going to get any pushback from that person. We can deal with that. And we can and that's a sacrifice we can make comfortably. Then that's what they're going to do. The example Grace mentioned, which is a really massively important one, of the where this university recently, reversed course on a particularly ridiculous allegation, came because the university felt the heat coming the other way. And that's what they need to feel. So they need to feel this is going to be problematic if we go that way, more problematic than if we go the way we started. From an individual perspective, that means making it hard. And so that's then where the dark arts of being a lawyer come into play. One of the key assets we have when dealing with these issues, so these are disciplinary proceedings, these are internal disciplinary processes that universities conduct using their own instruments, so policies, codes, EBAs, etc., against their own staff and students. The asset is that they really don't understand their own governing laws. They're really bad at this. They typically fuck it up pretty much every time. And that's an advantage if weaponized against them. What they like to do when someone's posted something on social media that someone doesn't like because it's employing an anti-Semitic trope or whatever, is they'll write a letter saying, hey, we see you did this. We have some concerns. We are concerned that act may have put you in breach of this list of policies. And they will list every policy they have. And then that's it. And then they say, hey, also, you need to tell us why you're not in breach of this. So that is an inversion. It's a reversal of their obligation. It's not procedural fairness, which is their core obligation. And so the first thing we do in that situation is we write back and say, hey, thanks. We can't respond to this. This poor person you are accusing of being an anti-Semite cannot respond to this because we don't know what you're talking about. So tell us, in respect of this policy, your social media and public comment policy, which provision did he breach and how? And in respect of the occupational health and safety policy, which provision did she breach and how? And you have to tell us that for every single one of them and stop fudging, because it's your obligation to make the case. It's not our client's obligation to disprove
to prove that they haven't done something wrong. That tends to confuse them. And the goal here tactically is to make this filled with friction, this process, to make it feel really hard and sludgy for them. Like it's gonna be painful. And that's only fair because they're the ones who are levelling really serious allegations that are potentially career-ending. So they have to make the case. The goal is to squeeze them into the narrowest possible set of definitions and allegations of wrongdoing in terms of their own instruments, so that they cannot slime around it and fudge and try and get you for some sort of vibing breach, but to actually find a specific breach of a document to which you are subject, obligations you have that they can hold you to account for. They may still get you, because at the end of that road may be a subjective question of, for example, whether, as is the case in current matter I've got, a watermelon is anti-Semitic. And people have that opinion, and a decision maker can ultimately decide that is an unsafe thing, watermelons. And that is a determination they can come to. But if then we need to do something, if we need to challenge that, then we've got them in the narrowest possible framework to do that. So our client then has the best possible chance of overturning that patently ridiculous decision. We're in the field of procedural fairness and natural justice, which is a woolly field of the law, and the courts have only limited jurisdiction to interfere, but they do have power. Staff are in a much better position than students because they're employees and they have a lot more legal protections because of that. They have certain rights that are preserved. They have an EBA. They have academic freedom, whatever that now means. Students are basically people who've hired the university to give them an education for which they pay. And so their relationship in legal terms is far more fraught, and so they're in much greater danger from a disciplinary perspective. But still, they have rights, including the right to procedural fairness and natural justice. Obviously, how you approach any particular situation you find yourself in is completely contextual to whatever it is. And I repeat to all my clients that nobody has an obligation to martyr themselves to the cause. And if they choose, because they need to choose, to prioritise their job or their education over the cause, fair enough. But they are not unempowered. And understanding where this is coming from and what is on the other side of it is really important, because then we can countervail that power, that power and that threat. And sometimes they do back off. Usually what we find is we just never hear from them again. Rather than them making a decision, it just disappears, which is as good as it being reversed. So that's really all I want to say.
Sound okay? Okay, great. What was that? speak into it? Okay. Hi, everyone. I've got the pleasure of taking you into the final plenary, which I'm really looking forward to. So I probably won't take up the full time. I'm a staff member here with two hats on. So I deal as an executive officer with some of that sludge and administrivia that we have to deal with as administrators, as well as the academic side. And just kind of navigating as part of the University of Sydney Staff for Palestine, some of, how we navigate policies within the system while we're working within the system. One of the interesting things leading up to this event was we were asked to change the image on our poster because one of the images featuring from the May action that happened, I think, in May 2024 involved a poster that said Israel is a terrorist state with a figure that might have been construed as an anti-Semitic trope. So we were asked to change it, which we duly did. And I think that speaks to some of the repertoire of strategies where we kind of confuse and confound them sometimes by cooperating with them strategically and tactically, just as a bit of fun. We submitted the risk assessment, we duly ticked all the boxes and that's okay. We're happy to do that so we can keep holding these events. So I'd like to talk to, I guess, my experience as a co-organiser of the University of Sydney Staff for Palestine, just really a participant more than anything else. But I also wanted to kind of situate it along three axes, if you will. One of them is individual versus institutional strategies. One of the other axis is oppositional versus propositional strategies. And the third one I'd like to raise, the idea of resistance as a practice has also come up during the day. So I'd like to discuss cultural versus political resistance as a strategy and the efficacy of both of those. What I'd like to say about our group, we're 100 plus strong, and I think we have resisted the iron law of oligarchy, where you either centralise and you only have one or two people who take on a lot of the organising. I think we've got a good system of distributed volunteering. And we try to embody that which we, preach. So, the voluntarism, the solidarity, the horizontalism, the egalitarian spirit, the collective defence that Vince spoke about. And I think that one of the things that Palestine has brought forth for us is that it's brought into sharp relief that Palestine is an everything issue. It's a union strength issue. It's a gender issue. It's a housing justice issue. It's related to everything because the underlying dynamics that animate the domination inherent in the repression in Palestine underpins systems of colonisation everywhere. And I love that quote by Lila Watson, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. She was an educator from Queensland, an Indigenous elder, and she said, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is tied up with mine, let us work together. And that is the central idea of how we navigate a repressive system with some really good people, I have to say, in a corporate university. We work together. We mount that collective defence. We take on that shared risk. And navigating some of those policies has been quite humorous, so dealing with the sludge, as Michael put it so well. So I think that Palestine, as everyone in this room knows, has been such an axial issue that shines a torch. And I think people for so long have been used to shrinking from it, and now we're using it to shine a torch on systems of repression. So that's kind of inverted it for us. We can try and use it as leverage. So I guess our role in the epistemic community that a university is. And also it's an emotional community, as I think Geordie in one of the previous session alluded to, drawing upon Sarah Ahmed's work, is that we're all there for one another. And I think that we can draw upon community-based methodology for organising, things like ABCD, asset-based community development, where we do a community audit of skills of members and try to leverage our strengths. And we have been involved in about, on average, one action per month, I counted last year, in terms of rallies. We get together to workshop submissions to various fora, the People's Inquiry. A number of us were involved in giving testimony to that. And also we try to organise fora and we're supposed to be the cognoscenti, that lovely Italian word, Lucia, if I'm pronouncing that properly, the people who know. But we're trying to translate that into the people who act. And I guess if we look at the scale of activity, the micro, the meso, the macro, we kind of sit in the middle where we intermediate between, members who might come into trouble because they said something on Viva Engage, and some of them have been real doozies. Whenever we object to dehumanisation, and I think, Joel, you've also, given us a wealth of examples today, they suddenly discover that we exist, which is great. And it's not wonderful that they discover that we exist through such a negative example, but I think increasing our visibility on campus is also a function of cultural resistance. And so whilst it's true that direct action is what often moves the needle, we often do need the cultural side as well. The book clubs. We also were involved in the political economy of Palestine reading group, which was held weekly and a number of us were involved in. And it's often the case that many of our members came to the Palestine issue as an, useful prism for looking at world politics through reading a book, through reading a work of fiction. And I don't know whether any of you are familiar with systems theory, but if you, it kind of recalls for me Donella Meadows' leverage points, points at which you intervene in a system that are kind of powerhouses of kind of like windows into which you can shift something, where a small shift can cascade and cause great shifts throughout the system. I think we're kind of existing in a system that's in decline in a lot of respects, and we're forging those democratic spaces that Vince mentioned. And so I think that's a challenge in terms of, balancing that oppositional and the propositional strategies regarding resistance, to speak to that axis. So apart from systems thinking, the other useful way to situate, I guess, our group and some of our activity is to look at modalities or regimes of social change. You could look at how we can do things within the system, and that's often co-opted, of course. We can look at subverting the system. But I guess one of the limitations of resistance is that can be so easily folded into existing strategies. Just the fact that we're holding this forum, it was given the green light, but then the university, it can diversity wash, some of the events. So we're just mindful of that. But I guess that the third modality, when it occurs, strategies occur when they're more incubated, outside of the gaze of the public transcript, that holds a lot of promise. It recalls the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World, World War I phrase, building a new world in the shell of the old. And I think in the midst of these decaying systems, we might be seeing these green shoots come up, different ways of organising, different types of organisation. And I think that our group, I hope that we, embody that in many respects. So, this is a historic juncture, and I think that people do have unprecedented awareness, but I also think that we have to meet people where they are, and we have to do the emotional labour. You know, not everyone has the same level of awareness in this room. And to that end, I think that some of the students in this room in particular are my heroes. Thank you. You know, the Deglans, the Shavans, the Graces, you know, several students in this room, and supporting our students is a key task of the staff for Palestine. And we forge links as much as we can with different groupings, including APAN. I see PAG is here, which is wonderful, and, you know, several other groupings. So again, apologies for the sketchy thoughts involved in the logistics of organising, but just also wanted to acknowledge the wonderful speakers before me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to Anne, and thank you to all of our speakers. You'll hopefully have questions, responses to our speakers. You may have thoughts of your own as to where to next. Could just be thought bubbles, could be quite concrete proposals. Do we have a couple of volunteers with microphones? Okay, so we have a good amount of time. I'll start by giving people 2 minutes. I'll give you a ding at 1.5. If we get a lot of contributions, which hopefully we will, I might. Okay, it's good to see so many hands. Keep your hands up. I'll keep a list and I'll indicate to get you to drop your hand. So we'll use this microphone. I think given the number of hands, I'll just let the speakers all come back in bulk at the end of the discussion. Start here.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your very eye-opening contributions today. I sort of had a question around the idea of how when you look at like these complaints that are coming in, or you look at the allegations that a lot of pro-Palestine activists are getting, it's coming from this perspective that there's a group of people out there who, regardless of what they believe, regardless of their political ideology, they feel that they have been offended, and they feel that the speech is, the speech or the protests are harmful or discriminatory or racist. I'm doing my honors in psychology, and a lot of the social psychology constructs that they develop is kind of through this lens where it is like you're sampling people and you're asking them, what do you think is racism? Like how do you define that? And it's sort of allowing people to define what is anti-Semitic and what is harmful speech. And so I've just like in my experience and seeing these things, it seems like a lot of these responses are just kind of coming off the back of that. And regardless of when you offer sort of logical or, detailed historical explanations of actions and contextualizing things, there's still the huge elephant in the room, which is that these people feel harmed. And I think that's like the framework that the university has been taking with pro-Palestine activism. And so I guess my question is, like, to what extent is it meaningful or useful to engage with the idea that these complaints and these acts of repression is being based off of like very undefined constructs of so-called racist frameworks and off the back of subjective and unsubstantiated claims.
Thank you. Declan was next. I'll have to give people one ding at 1 minute and then 1.5 next. Okay, Declan. Yeah.
I just thought one thing is kind of worth remembering in all of the discussion about repression is just how much of a mobilizing issue Palestine has been like no other. I've been a student activist here for several years now in the climate movement with staff solidarity on their strikes, education campaigns. And Palestine has just been the issue that has brought the most amount of students and staff into activism and into organized political activity compared to any of them. And I think that is the real strength that we have as a movement, is that we can count on an issue which has been, like some of the great issues in the past, a massive radicalizing thing, such as like the Vietnam War. It's been something that's really separated people. The question I had for some of the panel, I'd be particularly interested in, Anne and Grace, is what are some of the things in terms of like the tactics and actions that we can look forward to or think that we should be doing in the next kind of immediate period? Because I think one of the things about the movement that I've learned during it is that different actions are useful at different points. Sometimes you can do things like the encampment. Sometimes you have to fall back on more defensive things. But then sometimes you want to do actions that try and bring even more people into it and try and appeal to people where they're at. Sometimes you can do a Sydney Harbour Bridge march, and sometimes you need to do a Palestine inquiry. So I just want, if there are any like kind of concrete thoughts about the next actions and things that we can do.
Thank you. I'll take Lana and Mitchell.
Thank you for a great panel. Lana Tatur. This question is for Michael, Bradley, and perhaps also for Vince. The confidentiality issue that is tied to misconduct is real. Now, I understand that confidentiality initially comes to protect us. However, universities are weaponizing confidentiality to go after staff and students. In the case of students, it is much easier to violate the confidentiality. When it comes to staff, it can cost us our jobs. But the issue is that, first of all, it keeps us siloed. But our power is actually in shaming the university and mobilizing publicly to defend ourselves. By not having this option, we are made even more vulnerable. So my question is, what are the legal options around confidentiality, and whether now we're getting into EBA agreements, maybe something need to be thought in relation to confidentiality, because the lobby works publicly and it can mobilize pressure, which puts us at risk, but we can't mobilize the other way around. Just one thing. And there are ways around it. We know that from the UK. We know that from the US, where people are mobilizing publicly. So it's not either or.
Excellent. Jeff, and then we'll come over to this side of the room.
Yep. Thanks so much. Excuse me, just a couple of quick questions for Michael and for Vince. So, Michael, I just wanted to know if we can and how can we do a subpoena on the university for all of the complaints that have been submitted. So I think people might have seen the article on the ABC the other day that there were 50 identical complaints made to the ABC. It shows the fabrication. So I really want to subpoena the university because they just redact everything when we do FOIs. And secondly, I wanted to know for the potential for a class action, because clearly there are quite a few aggrieved people here, and can we do a class action? And for Vince, I wanted to know what are the aside from the rhetorical commitment to protecting academic freedom and freedom of speech, what are the practical, concrete measures that you have taken or are going to take? Because so far I haven't actually seen any protection of our freedom of speech, and the university is in very clear violation of that charter dozens and dozens of times. Thanks.
Awesome. A few over here. I think I'll start with Nikolai here.
Hi, I've got a similar question that follows on from what Lana and our friend over there said, and that is about the intellectual freedom provisions in the enterprise agreements. And I think it's not just about protecting them, it's also about expanding them, because if you look at them, they are not absolute, and there are restrictions that say that your intellectual freedom has to be exercised with the highest professional, legal and ethical obligations, which is a very, very broad restriction and open to interpretation, as we have seen in some of the court cases. So that's, I guess, my question for some of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Nikolai. Go to Ian all the way up the back, and then there was a woman just there in the black top after that. I'll keep taking names, but I've got quite a long list already, so we'll just got you.
Thanks. I want to make my point about the collective resistance, because I think one of the things that's been obvious at this university, it's been the importance of the staff support for the students who have been disciplined, and that very public opposition has been absolutely crucial, I think, to pushing the university back. And I think that even holding this symposium, I think we talk about the war of position, but a war of position is a war. And even when we think we're in the trenches, it's important to think about how we get out of the trenches. And then I see this symposium has been one way of actually the academic staff actually going on the offensive somewhat against the university, which clearly has both the staff and students in their sights. I also think the question of the enterprise bargain you're coming up to, other people can make the point about the content of that particular clause, but I think it gives the staff an enormous opportunity to actually argue for why you need that academic freedom in the EBA because of Palestine and because of what the university has been doing, and use it to actually go on the political offensive in that regard, both under the protection of the EBA as well. So I think the other thing, though, is also a question to Vince. I think one of the big questions that we do have is the question of the right to strike in Australia. We talk about Vietnam, we talk about what the unions were able to do in Vietnam. We know there's a constraint here about the right to the strike, and we need to keep raising that inside the union movement, that right to strike has to be fought for, that bad law has to be broken, and I look forward to that in the EBA as well.
Thanks, Nick. The woman there, maybe I could just intrude quickly also to say in response to Nikolai, we do actually have claims on the table right now to strip out all of that language that waters down those protections in the University of Sydney Enterprise Agreement. Yes. So the woman in the black there, up the back. Yep. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think similar to what Ian was saying in the importance of holding a symposium like this, I just wanted to highlight one of the forums that students were able to hold with actual Palestinian academics, staff and students alike. And one of the things that came out of that with Dr. Ahmed, who's the head of agricultural sciences at the Birzeit University in Gaza, is that every single time a university there is decimated or significantly damaged, actually, you have Palestinians rebuilding those buildings, holding classes online with thousands of students and staff, and that's the kind of resistance that we need to build solidarity with. Actually, we need to be honoring and fighting for the BDS demands to cut the ties with Israeli unis that are coming from Palestinians themselves, and it's our job here, staff and students alike, to resist the repression against making those BDS wins. And I think, like everyone else has said here, the repression is because they know that type of collective and organized defiance is what can actually win those BDS demands. So I think, our job here is to build a movement that's actually strong enough to stand up against the repression. Every single act, every single forum that we hold, every single student general meeting where we actually back the right to Palestinian resistance, which is an internationally deemed basic human right. That's the type of action that we need to resist the repression that we're getting from management. That's the type of movement that we need to build that will actually be strong enough to cut those ties.
Thank you. Could you pass the microphone through to Josh in the middle?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I guess it's probably obvious, but one of the reasons they're targeting universities, of course, is because they know historically these are places which can be the hearts of broader social rebellions. And I think that's one of the key things they're trying to clamp down on with the things like the campus access policy. Partly it's to squash and silence the dissent within the university itself, but also to try to prevent universities being hubs for broader organizing in society potentially. Because one of the things that the cap and things like that do is give the universities much greater power to also limit how much people from outside, or what do they call us? Foreigners from the university, like people who aren't current staff or students, being able to attend and participate in and help organize on the campuses. That was one of the things during the student encampment, which some of the speakers alluded to, when there was a real threat against the student encampment by, mobilizations by Zionists and all the growing threats from the media and authorities. And we know the university at that time was like lobbying and trying to get the legal basis to send the riot cops in. One of the key moments was that big demonstration where hundreds of people came from off campus as well as on campus to defend the encampment. And I think they want to stop that from happening. So I think the point of those is also to look to, as people have said, the power that we have to stand up to this is ultimately still the mass power we can mobilize on university, off university, the struggles at university being linked to the broader social rebellions going on in society. And that's what we need so much more of in this age.
Thanks, Josh. Tanya over here.
Thanks. This is a question for Michael Bradley. I really like the description of the resistance through legal means that you talked about. I actually thought about it so much that I have a hypothetical scenario, if I can just quickly run it past you. So when people receive those lists of policies and a letter asking them to respond to whatever they might have breached, let's say that we compile a list of such breaches and send the complaint back to the university. And that the university goes, whoops, we really shouldn't be doing this. We should start an internal investigation. And they start something like public interest disclosure process. What kind of legal doors does that open for us? Because my concern with this hypothetical scenario is that it's still university investigating itself up to the point where ombudsman might be involved. So is there any value in the process before the ombudsman is involved?
Interesting. Luna, isn't it? Yep.
Hi, my name is Luna. In that photo in front, I'm holding the Quest for Palestine banner at the encampment. And last year, I was like nearly deported by this university for writing on a whiteboard saying Free Palestine. And I guess my question is like, what are some examples of campaigns, ongoing or otherwise, to build back union density? Because as Grace said, like students are less active because of housing and cost of living crisis. And I would say that it is like, yes, and it is exactly union business to organize against those crises. And that throughout the day, we have heard that how USIN management attacks Palestine solidarity and then uses that to repress student and trade unionism. So whether that is burning out activists with endless complaints, misconduct, casework, or whether that is scaring student activists and journalists from activism or truth-telling, right? And in response, I would say that students and staff have to use social movement campaigns to build back organic grassroots like unionism, so to defend Palestine solidarity and everything else. So in the student unionism context, whether that is campaigning for international house, fighting against the crisis of sexual violence on the colleges or against cost cuts. And in the context of the enterprise bargaining, whether that is like fighting against job cuts, against wage theft and staff casualization, or campaigning for paid transition leave. And that, yeah, like we should just find ways to fight back.
Thank you. Okay, I have 3 more people on my list, and if I just give you 1 minute, I hope that won't. Yeah. So we'll take James and then the woman here, and then I think Luch. Okay, fine. Yeah. So just 2 more speakers, and then we'll come back to the panel. James, and then the woman here. So sorry, Luch.
I'll be very quick. There's been a lot of talk about collective action, absolutely, but I want to put the weight onto the more secure, whiter people in the House. And what are they doing? And so I was looking back at the Palestine and Praxis Scholars for Palestinian Freedom statement from a few years ago. I'm wondering if that's going to be updated so we can put the pressure on the more whiter, more secure academics and general staff who are here to come to the fore to back up some of these other things which we need to do.
Okay. And the woman here with the computer.
Following on from that, what we've heard today is about people who were targeted as individuals who didn't receive the support of their colleagues. They were isolated by their colleagues. So what is the union? Has the union got a role there in ensuring that when people are targeted as individuals, if that's what the university is doing, then what is being done to ensure that the people around them who are, if they are union members, are supporting them? Even asking them how the hell they are. We have heard today how people weren't even spoken to.
Thank you. So you can take up to 2 minutes each, and you want to just decide the order? Do you want to go in the same order?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go in the same order.
Yep.
Just okay. All right.
This all?
Yeah, it's all nothing.
Okay, great. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, I was trying to keep notes along along the way, but possibly just beginning at the end, because that's the starting point and that's the reality. The the corporatization of our universities has fundamentally changed in many ways. Obviously, the culture that staff and students experience at the institutions. So there have also been, external legislative changes that have taken place as well through, neoliberalism over the last 20, 30 years. So if you look at the composition of university councils, they, since the early 90s, have transformed from having some kind of notion of the public good to now literally be stacked by corporate types, right? From mining, from banks, right? This is completely conscious. What that means for us on the ground is that there is a culture of fear. The corporate tactics have been, brought to bear on campus. Now, I think we have to break it down to individual actions at times. I think basic fundamental solidarity with your colleagues at work as a human, right? We have to encourage it, and that's what I meant when I said the very notion of collectivity is under threat, and that in our union is seen as such a basic, such a fundamental part of our strategy in enterprise bargaining at Beyond. But it's a systemic issue. So without job security, and when you turn up workloads, and when you start picking people off, and when you create a culture of fear, it is very difficult to resist. So that's why job security is at the centre of our enterprise bargaining, because if you have security, you are that much more empowered. Okay. In terms of academic freedom, we have had a lot, clearly, of issues across the sector. A lot of them are sorted out when we go in and breathe fire and brimstone. It's sorted out, quietly at the time. We have a number. We have 3 or 4 going disputes. We did defend in the early stages Randa at Macquarie. You would have all met Jamana. We're loading up again to defend our comrades. We're absolutely relentless with this, but it also needs to be dealt with at that systemic level through enterprise bargaining and through the right. So this is why for every single branch of the NTEU across the entire country at every university, we have mandatory claims that every branch must pursue with regard to academic freedom. Because as soon as you start picking people off, we all know the thing falls apart. But I will say finally as well, going to that systemic issue, 18 months ago, we were dealing with the beginnings of all our academic members being picked off with massive job cuts across universities, again, to destabilise us. With trumped up, financial reasons using corporate tactics. What we have done is go after the systemic issue. So you will know and notice, hopefully, that there is before New South Wales Parliament an inquiry into the governance of New South Wales University. So our tactic and our strategy was to turn the tables and to go after them at the systemic level. Now, if you've been following it, the horrors that have been illuminated, right? Incompetence, corruption, just abuses of power, and university councils stacked with completely the wrong type of people that you'd want running a university. The case has been made. The tide is turning. It is our job to turn that now into material change. So I think this all adds up to us having some confidence that perhaps the tide is turning, that we can then take that confidence into our struggles, our solidarity struggles, and for Palestine in particular.
Had written down some stuff just in relation to the competent and safety and complaints thing, and then the next steps, I suppose, more generally in the student union context. So Amanda and I were in the same boat right now regarding complaints and people's levels of comfort being weaponized against us, no matter how much you say, this is a level of comfort based on a violent political ideology. And it just doesn't matter in terms of what the university eventually rules. So I think that comes into things like the next steps we've been discussing in terms of, on the other side, showing how that political repression isn't just an issue of comfort for us, but it's safety, livelihoods, mental and physical well-being, which is things like the Royal Commission submission that will get done by next weekend, going to the National Student Ombudsman on that kind of reverse side, because we know that Zionist lobby groups have been going there themselves. Again, that kind of fighting fire with fire, maybe TEXA as well if it's relevant, but I'm a bit more stacked against us, so it might not be worth trying. In terms of from here, what's happened, like as Declan mentioned, we've had the encampments, we've had the March for Humanities, we've done a variety of tactics when they're available. And I think it's worth noting as well that a lot of these big things like the encampment now are over 2 years ago. We have whole new cohorts of students that wouldn't have seen it. They didn't see how badly the university and Zionists treated us during it. They don't know a pre-campus access policy scenario or what we used to be like. So as part of that educational aspect, and I think starting strong semester 2 about that and showing them that the university does not care. They will throw them under the bus with these complaints processes when they feel like it. And that, again, being proactive and telling students that they can protest on campus and telling them about their rights will be super helpful in that way. Maybe something like another SGM would be good with a specific focus on things like freedom of speech and complaints. I think people do have a bit of referendum fatigue because they vote, but then because the university doesn't take the SRC seriously, they don't do anything. But I think with a different focus and tact there, we'll bring in a whole new layer of students and again, make it not just about us, but this is an issue for all students and all their complaints and all the procedural fairness there. And would also really love the help and ideas that were brought up. Maybe a subpoena of those documents is necessary, looking at that uni legislation and the policies and where they breached them in terms of their duty of care for students would be super helpful. Again, that idea of making it costly and a PR nightmare for the uni.
I feel like I copped a bunch of requests for free legal advice, which is not unusual. I'll just quickly address the ones I remember. So the question of confidentiality being weaponized against staff by universities is a critical one. Absolutely, it's coming up all the time and needs to be addressed. I would think, yes, the EBA is the right place to be doing that. The point of confidentiality is to protect the interests of the staff member, not the interests of the institution. Have seen quite a few cases where confidentiality is being wrongly asserted by universities. And saying, in fact, very often when they're saying to you, you must keep this confidential, they're wrong because their policies are shit. But on the question of legal action, the case I really want to run is a case on the failure of the universities to understand and respect the duties that they owe to their own staff and students. What we have seen over this past couple of years is that has been completely forgotten in the frenzy and this feverish rush to placate the pro-Israel lobby and the hurt feelings that it represents. No regard has been paid whatsoever to the fact that universities owe a duty to their own people to protect them. And when their people are being subject to targeted attacks, concerted, disingenuous, bad faith attacks that are designed to take away their living, to rub them out, to silence them, to cancel them, the university's obligation is to stand up and defend them. And they are signally not doing that. And that is, it's a moral failure. It's also a failure of their duty of care. And the case I really want to run is it's discriminatory. And particularly when so many of the targeted people are being targeted because not just of their political opinion, but who they are. So many Palestinian academics have been targeted specifically for that reason. And that is racist. So it's a difficult case, but I really want to run it. The other thing I just wanted to address, the very first question, it was a really good question, and this is at the core of everything that's going on, which is this issue of hurt feelings. Our law supposedly protects free speech and prohibits the margins. Hate speech is the narrowest strip at the outer edge of free speech. It's the bit we don't tolerate because it's not okay, because it's harmful. It does not protect against hurt feelings. It does not protect people from being offended because someone has said something they don't like. And if you follow the logic of the current Royal Commission, it's playing right into that. What it's talking about, I hope it won't ultimately go in that direction, but certainly so far it's not promising. What it's pandering to is that notion that there's some sort of equality between the hurt feelings of a group of people who don't like the thing being criticised and the not hurt feelings, but, dead feelings of the people being genocided. These are not equal things. So actually the conversation is happening on completely the wrong level and causing massive confusion. So we need to kind of step back to that. From that, go back to first principles of free speech. It's very unfortunate that we do not have legally protected free speech in this country, but that's another conversation.
Thank you. I'll be quick, and I just want to say in response to the question about different strategies at different times, I think that's a point that's well made. A whole spectrum approach, I think, is useful, where you look at things like arts, collaboration, autonomous zones, but it does matter what strategy you approach at different times. As you said, Declan, there's a time for a march for humanity. There's a time for this. And I think deciding which leverage point is most efficacious at which point is an art. And it's important to get together and organise around that. So, yeah, let's talk.
Okay, thank you again to all our speakers. So we have gone 5 minutes over time, which means that we're planning to start the plenary at 5 o'clock. So if you want to just stretch your legs quickly, but we are going to start rearranging the speakers and get ready to start the plenary. So don't go too far. That's what I'm saying. Thank you again. Yeah.